Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach Replay Show. It is February 2022. That's still very weird for me to say, but our theme this month is all about for the love of coaching. So we've been excited to bring some of our most kind of passionate coaches in here to talk a little bit about their passion within this leadership and coaching work. And I'm so excited today to introduce our guest to you. She and I have had a lot of conversations here lately, and we really do feel like we're separated at birth. So we'll try to not gab too much for you today. But I'm also so excited about this topic, which there isn't a lot out there for coaches on coaching co-teachers, whether those are two gen eders or gen ed and some other interventionists like a special educator. And this is the work that really, where I really found a lot of passion back in my work in Texas and continue to kind of follow the efforts of others. And this is what our guest here today does. So without further ado, Allison Curran, welcome to the Coach Replay Show.
Thanks, Cory. I'm so excited to be here, and I echo that we won't gab too much. We'll try.
We'll try. But, throughout our conversation today, especially if this is coaching co-teachers or supporting the co-teaching on your campus or in your district is something that you do, we want to hear from you. There's not enough of us out there that kind of really do this, or it's a part of our more formal part of our role. So we invite you to connect with us. Dropping comments below as you're watching or listening to today's episode, asking your questions. So we're excited to be able to kind of bring this conversation. So let's start, Allison, by you just telling everyone a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I have the pleasure now of working at an educational service center in Southwest Ohio. But prior to doing this, I taught in a classroom and was a co-teacher for 17 years, also here in Southwest Ohio. And as part of my daily work today, I get to coach and consult and offer professional development. And some of my very favorite interactions and contexts involve co-teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when we talk about co-teaching, you mentioned a little bit your experience. And what I love about this is often the folks that I've talked to who support co-teaching through coaching and other kind of professional learning experiences are themselves special educators. That's how I came into that work. But you are a general educator. And so I think that's cool. And you also work with some co-teachers who are both the gen ed teachers. Some districts in your area have been able to create programs that allow two gen ed teachers to be in the room, and then also our more traditional idea of co-teaching of gen ed and special ed, right?
Yes. Actually, it's kind of interesting you bring that up because I only thought of co-teaching as a general ed experience when I first started, because my co-teaching experience predominantly at the high school I worked in was two gen ed teachers in a interdisciplinary setting. And then I noticed as we went through, and that was probably because our service delivery model in my high school was still very much a resource room or pull out or intervention kind of setting. But I was one of those people that was like, I can't have this weird disconnect with the teachers that support students that are taking my classes. So I was always kind of wheedling my way into those conversations that were different than just showing up at an IEP meeting or something. Yeah. And then, like, to your point, that is some of interesting work I'm getting to do this year. There's a district here in Southwest Ohio that is electing to use their federal money to offer two co-teachers in every K-3 classroom, and they have 10 elementaries. So it's a pretty amazing endeavor that they are taking on with these two gen ed teachers. And then my organization, we're coaching those teachers about the co-teaching practices that will transform those experiences for kids.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I don't think I made the connection for you. I think I assumed elementary because most of the co-teaching gen ed work that I experienced down in Texas, if there were, like what you explained, gen ed co-teachers, it was more at the elementary level and not the high school level. So I think that's really interesting. And I kind of want to, when we talk about co-teaching, let's just kind of talk about the different ways that can look, right? It doesn't always mean that you've got two certified, it's not always two certified individuals. You can have co-teaching that happens with a paraprofessional as well. It doesn't always mean that they're always in the classroom together every day or for the whole class period. Even we've got many co-teaching situations out there where they're there one day a week or 20 minutes a day. And, it's a very complex situation for a lot of co-teachers. It's some of the hardest work, being a co-teacher, at least in my experience and in the work that I've done with other co-teachers, but it's also some of the most rewarding work when we're doing it well. So here you are, right? You're coaching co-teachers now. And I think you and I kind of fell into that kind of leadership piece in a similar way, right? I also saw I don't want this just to be a thing that happens in this room with me and my specific teachers or the team that I was working with. I really want to promote and advocate for my students in other spaces where co-teaching may not be a possibility. So I kind of nudged my way into these different conversations and kind of fell into teacher leadership that eventually led into district and building leadership. But coaching co-teachers is something quite different, I think. There's a difference in coaching a partnership of teachers versus one-on-one with a teacher. So what do you enjoy most about it?
Well, what I enjoy most is probably the fact that in that newness of two people working together, because there's the identity of each individual teacher, and then there's the identity of them as a pair. And so while their identities as individual teachers might be, like, hey, I've got a handle on this, or I know how to do this, or I've got some great routines and some practices. What I love about it is that when they come together, they're willing to have some newness, to a new fresh lens to look at instruction, to look at assessment and all the designs that really we need to bring that fresh lens to every day. They're able to do that because they have this authentic audience that isn't just me, the coach, but this other person that's going to ask them like, okay, that's not my day job. I'm not I'm not the content expert. So what do you elevate here? What's important here? And, the person will be like, well, would that strategy work for all learners instead of, just being a modification for some, so that they just are willing to have like this very natural opening to talk about some of the like basic building blocks of instruction that sometimes we don't tend to anymore. I mean, coaches we're trying to always tend to those things, but it's hard when you're in the act of teaching to really be able to give yourself that time and a natural audience, a person that you want to bring into this partnership. It's just an organic thing. So that's what I love about it, is that they're just open to having conversations about some like substantial topics that are a little harder sometimes to nudge into the conversations as much as we try as coaches.
Yeah. Or even for those ideas to feel more really more manageable, more sustainable, because I mean, again, one of the most frustrating and difficult things about being an educator is you want to do it all, but it's never perfect. We were just talking off screen about, perfectionism and how that's kind of systemic in really a lot of our work, both in education and outside of this field. But then also, I mean, we just have it's such a high stakes job being an educator, and it's difficult to feel every day, day in and day out, every moment that your best is enough sometimes. And I think the thing that I loved about being a co-teacher and that I love coaching co-teachers in is helping them build upon each other's strengths, right? To be able to kind of, my favorite thing about co-teaching is when I can kind of, when I'm working with a pair who's either come to the realization or comes to the realization that I don't have to necessarily do all be all. I now have a partner with a shared vision, a shared responsibility, and we can kind of divide and lean on each other. I don't have to know everything about this content area to still bring something really valuable to the table and support not just this group of students or this individual, but all the students, right? So I think that's the exciting part of it. Again, it doesn't mean it's easy, but it's really very, very rewarding.
Yep, I think just to kind of piggyback on that is what's interesting in our facility is that how I got into the co-teaching work. Of course, I had this like background in it, and experience, but most of the requests for any co-teaching support usually came through our intervention specialist center, and it didn't come through as tier 1 instruction. And what we're recognizing, and it's kind of gotten turned over to me because of this recognition, that really all learners are tier 1 learners before they are their other identifications, before they're their other, uniqueness. So trying to really take this from that tier 1 perspective has been an incredible elevation that I've enjoyed seeing, because that piece about all learners is what's critical here. And that's how it plays out in these 2 gen ed teachers' classrooms too, because they don't bring any special education lens to it. They're simply trying to utilize both of their talents and their strengths, as you mentioned. And the other thing I think I love about that is in our efforts to recognize each other's strengths, we're more open again to looking at the strengths of our kids. And so co-teaching naturally can leverage that, so that when we look at all the learners, we're looking at not just their deficits, but also their strengths, and utilizing that for small group instruction, utilizing that to get to know them, to find out what's going to work for them, and having 2 sets of eyes and ears to be like tuned into that and sharing that amongst ourselves to help support the learners.
Yeah, because I mean, if we look at the research behind co-teaching and its effectiveness, it really is, when we start to look at it as the shared responsibility, and it starts with that tier 1. It's not that my co-teacher comes in at this stage of the lesson when it's more complex, or when we have specific things we need to address, but really kind of thinking about it from the tier 1 instruction. So, and then everybody also grows. I've learned so much. I'm a better teacher. I'm a better coach because of those partnership experiences of the co-teachers that I've worked with as a teacher, and also had the privilege to coach. So it really is some very powerful work whenever you start to see it kind of start to kind of really rise to that potential of what co-teaching is.
Yeah. Yes. One of the things that it's just, I'm trying not to gab too much, but in these settings with the 2 gen ed teachers, one of the things that they're trying to discover is what are their whys? Again, they each have this identity. So like one of them might have their idea. I mean, in summation, they both want good things for kids, but there's a big difference between the teacher that wants them to pass the 3rd grade guarantee that we have here in Ohio versus the teacher that wants them to be ready for life, or to be in service or something. So getting them to talk about those whys and kind of identify what they want for those learners ultimately can help bring us through those sticky situations too. And I think that, and these are some sticky situations, we've, when you're trying to find your role in co-teaching, I think that you do go to your strengths, but I hate to say it out loud, but sometimes the kids get lost in the mix of us thinking about like, I'll lead the math lesson, you lead the ELA lesson, or something. And the reality is that all kids need us on deck all the time in a real strategic, intentional way. And we're just not used to having a second person that is there in that mix with us all the time. So it takes a lot of tending and nurturing to override some of our things that are just habits and not really built around learners. which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Sometimes that co-teaching can look like a class within a class, or the other individual doesn't really have a defined purpose or role, at all times within the classroom. So at some point, you hear that stigma of like just holding up a wall, and and those are some of the negative stigmas that we see co-teaching. So I think once we got that kind of solid foundation of the partnership, which we'll probably come back to here in a moment as we think about coaching stances, I love that you mentioned design, because I think that is the important piece that can kind of make or break co-teaching, not just the relationship and the shared vision and responsibilities of the adults, but also how those adults go about designing experiences, instruction. So what are some of the nuances that when it comes to design and co-teaching that you can kind of elevate within co-teaching?
Yeah. So the big nuance that I try to do, and again, they're very coming from a place like, I may know teaching, but I don't know co-teaching. So they're willing to like listen in on some foundational things that sound fresh and new to them. But one of the big nuances that I like to invite them to is how to position the learners first. Many co-teachers go in thinking I'll have like Station Tuesday, or I'll have, every Thursday we will do blah, blah, blah. And that's not always positioning the learners first. Quite often that's positioning the teachers, the adults in the situation. So anytime that I can pose questions to teachers to really bring them back to the focus of the learners, I just really like get kind of nerdy in those moments, and I have to like take it slow and ask them questions that are going to help them see that same transformative opportunity. But then that usually brings them to small group instruction, because nearly every one of the models that organizes the adults is high recommendations around those small group structures. Because if we know that if we start with the learners, we're going to start with a lot of variety. And so if a lot of my questions to coachees has a lot to do with, tell me a little bit about the variety of the kids in this regard, in this moment, in this lesson, in this unit, in this content. What do you know about them? And then how could we utilize that? Like, what if you wanted to pursue the same lesson with strengths-based groups? What would that look like? How would that be different? How would you organize yourselves to match that? What do you anticipate might be the variety that you'll encounter? What's the variety, and how might you observe that and notice that? And how are you going to go in strategically knowing that's what you're looking for? And then how will you communicate that information with each other? So another nuance being co-assessment. So used to having big data parties after school because we're single in our classroom alone. We have a lot of practices in education that don't really honor the best data collector we have, which is our eyes and ears. And really, how would you? I mean, we haven't talked even about this, but I do a lot of virtual coaching this work, because you can't be noticing what your co-teacher's doing and the kids are doing and be teaching. Like, it's just crazy.
Too many balls in the air to juggle, right?
Yeah. So from this reflective standpoint, you need to be able to have this opportunity to have a plan for how you're going to collect information about learners, and then how you're going to share that information you have, so that it's the promise of small groups another day. And then you can see how you'll organize yourselves around those small groups. I probably have more, but
no, I mean, I can connect so much to that, on a couple of points. So, again, thinking about it's that I love that learner first element of the design. What are we focused on? What do we know about our students, and what's going to be the best structure for our students? And then let's think about the adults. And so, we've got 6 models, Maryland Friends, 6 models of co-teaching. The one teach, one observe, the alternative teach, parallel teach, station teaching. There's 2 more. But when I was doing a lot of co-teaching, coaching, and professional learning, my goal in teaching those models was not just like, here's what it looks like, but this is why and when to use that. If you're low on planning time, these are some of the models that are going to be good go-to models that don't require a lot of prep and planning. These are models that work best when you need heterogeneous groups, homogeneous groups, thinking through those elements so they can start to really critically think about the design of the learning experiences and then how those two adults really support it. With one teach, one observe, right? Where one of our teachers is leading instruction and the other is there focusing on assessment, right? That observe should probably be assessment. What if the special education teacher, if we're doing a gen ed and special ed duo, takes lead of the instruction and lets the gen ed sit back and watch the class of students as they learn? They don't always get that opportunity, especially if I'm only partnered with my co-teacher, one class period a day. And then, how do they also continue to, in the lesson, but also outside of that lesson, come in and share what they're noticing, right? Like if we're both walking around the room and we're starting to hear some misconceptions, instead of me kind of whack-a-mole kind of teaching, can we come to the middle of the room and just for a moment say, I'm noticing I've got a lot of misunderstanding about this. Oh yeah, I see that too. Let's bring everyone back together for a reteach real quick, So, and to your point of the virtual coaching or just using video to help them kind of see how are they using the room? How are they using each other? Where are the opportunities for them to maybe come together and make some in the moment changes as they're going, or even just recording their planning? How do they go about design? That's usually the hard part, right? Because they're used to planning on their own if they've kind of done the solo teaching before co-teaching. So
I actually always say to teachers, I know that two adults are going to come into a classroom and try their very best for kids.
Yeah.
So our big wins for coaching will actually come from the co-planning, because that's where I want to hear them talk about learners. I want them to anticipate, to that example of misconceptions. I want them to even anticipate some misconceptions they might listen for, not be surprised when there's something they didn't think of also emerges in the lesson. Jot that down too, but really be able to have some quick sortable information about the learners. We thought we'd hear this, this, and this, and here's who maybe fell into that. And so we've got some small groups and we know exactly our purpose. Mm-hmm. And I think just that one segment of what you talked about could be a whole nother,
it could
moment, because I think you left team teaching off the list when you were,
I did leave teaching.
And there's a reason why. It's the least recommended, because it's not really about the kids that much. I mean, both teachers are standing in front of the learners, talking to them. There's very little opportunity in that moment for the teachers to collect any usable data for small groups. Right. There's no opportunity to, every teacher question in team teaching is one student response, whereas even if you did parallel and split the class in half, each teacher question gets one teacher response. That's two. That's double data.
Right. So, right.
Like why we wouldn't do parallel over team, in lieu of having, that kind of opportunity to really know the learners in a way that we might sort them for instructions like stations or something. Parallel is always going to be the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. Anytime you can kind of reduce the group size and get greater participation, greater engagement. I will say, the only time team teaching was really kind of a main for me was when I co-taught Algebra 1 with an 8th grade teacher. And she was very algebraic in her thinking, right, around the content. And I was a very visual. Math is, I will tell people all day long, I was an ELA teacher. I was not a math teacher. So when it came to, strategy around algebraic reasoning, we would team teach where show here's one way to approach the problem set. And then I would say, but Ms. Hoffa, could it work this way? And sometimes she'd be like, yeah, that's another way to do it. It's not how I would do it, but that is another way to do it. And then we could break off into, okay, if you like this version or this version, we're going to do a little more mini lesson. Other times she'd be like, no, Miss Camp, that doesn't really work that way. But we're modeling, positive discourse and collaboration. That was really the only teacher that team teaching really felt like we could turn to that often. but yeah, otherwise, if it's just you take slide 1, I'll slide 2, you know, then it's not really teaching. So when we, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, though, I think a lot of teachers fall into the habits around team teaching because the gen ed teachers really actually taking the lead, and the co-teacher wants a role. They want to feel belonging. And so, you know, we've talked about a lot of this small group is about creating belonging for the learners. The teachers need to feel some belonging too. I mean, so they don't want to be an aide. They don't want to be a glorified, you know, person that stands holding a wall up, right? They want to be active in the teaching. And what will often happen is they'll seek that role. And a lot of gen ed teachers will say, hey, come up and stand next to me and be a pretend student, you know, kind of thing.
Right.
And I think that's so detrimental to that belonging for that co-teacher, because nobody wants to look like the kid that isn't on the right page all the time, who doesn't know what's happening, who just repeats directions. And I also think
loses credibility with the students, right? You know, as well, right? They're like, I'm not going to ask Miss Camp because every time she tries it, she gets it wrong, right? So,
and then the other habit is, if you don't like that role, the other habit you often are left into without good co-planning is to be you know, herding cats. Like, I'm going to keep people on task. And those get old fast. Those roles are not teaching roles, and you get tired of those roles. And so the next thing that happens, before you know it, you're like, I'll take my kids to the back. I'll take my kids down to my room. I'll take my kids. And then those learners, their belonging is impacted because the adult didn't get the belonging that they deserved and wanted and needed. And so then those kids aren't part of the grade level demand. Those kids aren't getting to be in their strengths-based group. And side note, we just sent the kids who might have the most significant need with the person that's not the content expert. Who thought that was a good idea ever? So
it doesn't really speak to the heart and purpose of inclusion, right? Inclusive education, which is why we bring, you know, our special populations into that classroom, right? Not only is it their right, the free and appropriate public education to get those services in the least restrictive environment. Here's my sped language coming out. But I mean, it's also, it's not just like I place those kids and that teacher in a classroom, so here we're doing inclusion. So when we think about these nuances, right? Like, even I love the idea, and you've got it in your takeaways. You got a great blog in your takeaways about belonging, and how that's not just the students, but it's also the teachers. But then even just kind of thinking intentionally about our planning and our design of these experiences. And again, sometimes these are things that we can kind of blow the lid off of that class, whether that's, you know, one period a day or we're together all day. I think we can do things that we couldn't do before because there's two of us. But then, you know, other times it's just kind of just being more thoughtful around those pieces. How do those nuances really impact the coaching stance you take? Right. Coaching co-teachers is a little bit like marriage counseling sometimes. Do you feel that?
Oh,
I mean,
it can be, yes.
It can be. Sometimes when I'm coaching co-teachers, we'll have one-on-one sessions with each teacher, and then we come together and we do some group counseling, and but for your coaching stance, you know, how does that impact how you work with your teachers?
I think again, we can't say it enough, coming back to the learners and that being our common ground creates a lot of opportunities, because there is a little vulnerability there where they'll be like, again, I don't know how to do this for co-teaching, so I'm ready to kind of disrupt here a little bit. So if I can tap into that as much as possible, it's great. I also just think that my coaching stance comes at, again, the co-planning moment. I kind of get a baseline observation in all the time, just so I can see how they share a space. But generally speaking, I try to kind of nudge them in the direction of co-planning conversation being where the coaching might occur. So they might upload a video of co-planning, because co-planning can be very organic. It could be like in the hallway. It could be at the Xerox machine. So they can't always necessarily capture it that way, but I try to encourage it because it also sort of elevates it as part of this, that co-teaching is not just the co-instruction, it's the co-assessment, the co-planning as well. So I think that has a lot to do with those nuances. I have a team that I'm working with right now, and by sheer luck, well, maybe not so much luck, the people in those districts worked hard to pair people appropriately, but by however it worked out, they came in guns blazing, great at sharing the space, centering around the kids. Their first video request to me, and I had just kind of met them, is they said, if we're going to use this video, we want to turn the video on our independent learners while we're each running a station. We want to see how the independent learners are doing. And then they looked back at that, and before I even could watch the video, they'd already watched their video and already posed questions to each other and had some solutions in mind. And they said, we're willing to hear what else you might have in mind or what you might ask about. And it was just, to me, that was like the moment, right? Because I thought, man, they want to know about their learners. They're not wanting to give up on the fact that the two of them have active teaching roles to play cat herder. So let's trust the learners. Let's see what we need to do to like elevate that for them, that experience, so that they can, really self-regulate and get the most out of that independent moment.
Yeah. So, and again, that's the power of video though, right? For you, Allison, and it is for me. It's you've now empowered those teachers to be able to reflect, right? They don't have to lean on you catching the right day, the right time, the right moment when they're in those small group instruction and there's independent learning happening. I mean, they're going to be able to kind of see it for themselves. And, just by creating the opportunity for them to reflect, it sounds like they really kind of took hold of that. I think that's the exciting work in coaching. Co-teachers are not, right? Like, but that's also the great thing about coaching co-teachers is if they do have that relationship built where they can kind of peer coach in their roles with each other. So we had one, on a side note, one team, they were trying parallel for the first time, and they're using a new math curriculum. And so they're both trying to work on like the script and figure out how they're going to like promote elevate the right things in this math curriculum. And so they we turned 2 devices on to each of them teaching the same lesson, and then watched that back and looked at just a clip to see how, did you use the same language, how'd that go, kind of thing. So that was really fantastic. And the team that started out of the gate wanting to focus on their learners, part of that was because I think they were secretly afraid to be on camera themselves, which was all fine, right? So they turned it on the kids, but they had this great takeaway. And we just did a mid-year reflection and mid-year assessment on co-teaching. And one of the questions in the mid-year reflection work was around how often would you say that you are putting kids in small groups? And those teachers just stuck their hand up in the sky like it was nothing, and said, our kids are in small groups 90% of our day, and they spend the entire day together. So I thought, man, what about the belonging for those learners and for those teachers? So I cannot wait to see their latest MAP scores to see if they're seeing that same growth in the data that naturally they honor, because I think they've already got some great qualitative data that says things are probably going great. Working well, right? Yeah. Not just well for them, like they get along, but also, impactful for students. And again, that's the promise of co-instruction, is that, even with a more diverse group of students with greater variety of needs, they should be outperforming your single lead classrooms. Again, there's a lot that goes into that. And similar to you, I always find myself I usually start with what does it look like when you're both kind of in there facilitating, interacting with students, but then also the planning piece. And that planning piece can be kind of hard with co-teachers because, again, depending on the programming a particular district or campus has set up, a lot of times my work, at least back in Texas, were co-teachers who The one co-teacher worked with many different teachers, sometimes same subject, sometimes different subject, different grade levels, and they didn't always have common planning. And so, how do we go about, it's not co-planning when our one teacher turns in the lesson plan by 4 p.m. on Friday that we're going to use starting 8 a.m. on Monday. Like, how is the other person supposed to, create appropriate accommodations and modifications? How do they take that? How's that learner centered, right?
Yes.
So I do often, even if they don't always get a chance to sit down and plan, I want to be able to capture. I usually use video for that. Them planning, let them just be alone, turn a camera or audio recorder on, talk about their students in an upcoming plan. And then I can reinforce like, oh, that's a great question. Do you ask that every time? Because I think that's one that can really kind of elevate the work that y'all are doing for all students. Or, what about this particular group of students that I know that you need to meet the needs of? I didn't hear them a part of that conversation. So again, just kind of helping them learn how to collaborate off screen so that when they are in front of the classroom, things work as best as they can, because they're giving it their best. I mean, just as you said, they're bringing their best to it, but sometimes it's just some more off screen prep, right?
And I think that if they don't have that focus on learners, they can't even uncover solutions to that problem. So, we don't have co-planning time. Okay. But if we want to be focused on the learners and I'm going to walk into your class, is there a way to quickly communicate the misconceptions I could listen for? Is there a way to quickly, instead of just, they're going to come in and they're going to do their very best to be supportive, but they're without any clarity about what they could be assessing, what they could watch for, what they could care about at all. It's really hard. One of my favorite examples, just because I always think people are probably looking for examples, is I said to a team that didn't share co-plan, I said, even if the assignment you have laying out there, any good teacher is going to come in and be able to see, oh, I see that we're doing a problem set. Great. But if you circled number 6 and you said 6 is where the mistakes are going to show up the most, here's number 6, and here's what you might see, and here's a prompt to get them moving in a different direction.
Right.
I can pick that up, walk in the classroom, pick it up, and I can have an active teaching role in that classroom without a co-planning conversation at all.
Exactly.
So, and finding those solutions comes out of keeping that focus on the learners.
And that's such a great example. And that's something that, I did as a co-teacher. And then I also, especially with my teachers who had limited planning time, what can you give to your co-teacher to help them help you when they are there and be a meaningful part of that? And a lot of times it is, all right, what are you anticipating, lead teacher, as being something that you're going to encounter, and how are you going to respond? So I can at least mirror you, especially if I don't have the content area expertise, or, that may be a concept that I'm not terribly strong in, that instead of just kind of, well, here's all my materials and, you can kind of figure out from there, this is what we're doing, and just the material dump, the more valuable part is, from everything that you have planned, if we didn't co-plan it together, what are some things that I can anticipate also, so I can also think about the group of learners that are the reason that I'm kind of in the room in the first place. That's a great starting place. And then they tend to open up a bit more and start talking about the whole group and see that shared responsibility a little bit. So I
never understood how an intervention specialist would modify an assessment without that deep kind of conversation. Like, how,
throwing arrows in the dark, right?
Well, I come from the world of social studies, so and in ELA, but in my social studies work, all the questions look either really easy or really hard. I don't know. It can't be a difficulty question. It has to be, about access and rigor. So
right. So true. Well, as we kind of wrap up, I want to kind of come to one of your beliefs here around co-teaching, which is that co-teaching really kind of leads the way for personalized learning. Why do you believe that?
Oh my gosh. So personalized learning is a baby of mine, and probably it's because I've been in the co-teaching world where I see two adults that want to work so hard to meet individual learners' needs. It's brought me into the world of UDL and other things. So I think that just very quickly would be they already are utilizing this audience for the magic, the behind the scenes magic. So if I can say this to a co-teacher now, these are the same kinds of ways I can make that behind the scenes available to learners. And that's going to be important for personalized learning, is that it's not just, you'll know the standard by May. It's,
Right.
what can you know and understand now? And what do you know and understand now? And how can you be a part of that? And et cetera. Those habits around co-designing, if I have to sit with another audience and co-design, my next person I could co-design with would be learners. So that will be a heartbeat of personalized learning. Just that celebration of the uniqueness of learners, I think, is so significant to the work of personalized learning, knowing them not just as their deficits, but also as their strengths, utilizing that kind of information to co-design and to offer the right opportunities to kids. And then finally, just student voice. I mean, the emphasis of smaller groups doesn't go away with personalized learning. One of my favorite books I read was Reclaiming Personalized Learning by Paul Emmerich France. And he says, like, you need collective consciousness for personalized learning. You need this small group. So the small group opportunity that derives from wanting to have more voice from learners. If they have more belonging, they have that safety to offer their voice. And if they have that safety to offer their voice, that's data we collect. How can we turn that all into information that the learner and the teacher use together to design instruction? So I know that obviously could be another topic we talk about, but I love kind of utilizing that context and nudging those folks in the right direction.
Yeah. I can definitely resonate with that as well, obviously, but because, again, I think, it really is a gateway into personalized learning, because now that we've got two people and we recognize that it's more than just two people physically in a room, but we've got to really start to think about those nuances we talked about earlier around, design, and how do we approach the design, and that collaborative piece of design. Again, like in industrialized education is not working for our students, but we continue to pump out, curriculum with scripts and here's the main pathway and here's some things you can maybe do. But we really need our teachers to kind of come to looking at designing learning experiences rather than just planning a lesson and middle of the road. And I think that's also easier done when you've got another person and you're in a situation where we've got to think differently about the learning experience, because there's two of us now. We can think differently. So I definitely see that kind of, paving the pathway towards that personalized learning for sure.
Yep.
I love it. I don't know if I've ever made that connection between co-teaching and personalized learning. So that's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I want to remind all of our listeners, again, if you have questions, are you working with co-teachers and there's a situation you have a question about? I mean, Allison's a great person to reach out to, and she's got a whole other team of folks that also do this co-teaching work as well, who are fabulous at Hamilton County ESC. So drop those in. I geek out about those kinds of questions too. So, and if you want more content about supporting co-teachers as a coach or instructional leader, let us know. We'll build it into our program for season 4, which we're starting to build out. But you can access all of the resources and more ideas around Allison's episode here with us today in the notes and takeaways. So be sure to like, follow, and subscribe with us, not just on social media, but you can also get these episodes and takeaways right in your inbox, y'all. So notes and takeaways, though, be sure to check those out. Check out Allison's budding blog that she's kind of got going on, and other resources. Anything else, Allison, before we say goodbye to our listeners today?
No, but thank you. And I think we kept ourselves in check. We didn't gab too much, but we do think that we were separated at birth, as she mentioned at the beginning. Right. So I look forward to, being able to maybe have another conversation someday. That'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think many, many more to come for sure, Allison. All right, folks, we'll continue to tune in this month as we talk more about things, around this kind of budding passion around coaching and instructional leadership and building relationships and helping other teachers find their passion and love for teaching again through coaching. So be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the Coach Replay Show, and we will see you all then. Thanks so much for joining us today, Allison.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, y'all.